ready to enjoy a fireside chat about a book that's hot off the press, The Lost and the Found, a true story of homelessness, found family, and second chances. It is such a good book. We have two great speakers to talk about the book and homelessness in general. The New Yorker recently described the book as an earnest reminder of the moral side of the homelessness crisis, why it is still worth fighting for the basic dignity of all people, especially those who live and die in the teeth of the American contradiction. The book is beautifully written by Kevin Fagan. I was having some conversations beforehand and people were complimenting him on his writing skills. He's a seasoned observer of homelessness who's experienced it himself in the art of journalism and in his personal life. Kevin retired last month from 32 years as an award-winning reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. But I remember, I think, that his dad sent him to work when he was 12. So his career has lasted a little longer than that, so it's time for a rest. So you're going to love Kevin's book. Kevin is joined in conversation by a man who, in this town, really needs no introduction, Mayor Willie Brown, a seasoned observer of many things. First elected to the State Assembly in 1964, he served as its Speaker for 14 years before being elected to 2 terms as Mayor of San Francisco. I find him to be a friend of all people. So Kevin reported on homelessness while Mayor Brown worked to better manage it. We're honored to have them both. So to kick off the discussion, Kevin, when did you have your first conversation with Mayor Brown, and did it touch on homelessness?
Oh God, I can't remember my first conversation with the mayor. I think it might have been in the 80s when I was a reporter out in the Central Valley, and he was the Ayatollah of the Assembly, I think they called you. And I was awed. I was a young man. And I think you've been having paychecks longer than I have, because didn't you start out when you were a kid too?
Oh yes, I had no option.
That's right. So, but then we were just talking about this, about 10 years ago, maybe more, where the mayor was telling me, you should write a book about homelessness. Because we do, we run into each other quite a bit in the various circles in the city. And I said, yeah, I would love to. And he said, you should really do it. And so I'm just following orders all these years later. But what I have always liked about you is that you understood the dimensions of the issue. And there are a couple of famous things that happened. One is that you created more supportive housing than anyone before you, as far as I could tell as a reporter years ago. Am I remembering that correctly? I think
you are correct
yes.
in your memory of it. And each time you say, I did something no one else has done, that's a really good memory.
And then you famously said you can't solve homelessness, which, in 40 odd years of covering homelessness and having, spent periods myself homeless when I was a young man, given the country that we live in, the way the economy works, the way, our social safety net works, I think you got to point at it. At our best, we can come to a functional zero, which some communities do, where the people who come into homelessness get housed fairly quickly. I don't see that happening on a large scale. Certainly, it's never happened in San Francisco. You were kind of prescient. What you can do is address the problem, but saying that you're going to solve it sets unreal expectations for the realities that we're given right now. What do you think?
But if you recall, we politicians will tell you, the public, that we are going to take care of it. Yeah. We're going to solve it, and we're going to do it, particularly before you have to vote for us for re-election. And we want to keep you focused on the fact that when we have not done it by the time we're seeking reelection, that we get the opportunity to complete the task which we have failed at so far without acknowledging it, failure. And that's why every politician ought to read your book. The book you've written is really a directory for politicians, period.
Well,
And it really is a fabulous rendition. And long period of time, you covered it, and I actually went down to see if I could find exactly where the homeless island.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
That's terrific.
I went down South Market Mission, and have you seen what's down there now?
Oh, yeah, they replaced it. It was Homeless Island, for those of you who have not read the book yet, was a cement triangle traffic island at the corner of Mission and Van Ness. And 12 people lived on it, and they were all homeless and addicted to crack or heroin or booze or all three or a combination. And some years ago, I want to say maybe 5, 6, it was absolutely torn out and replaced by a pavement and a little bit of a plaza and a high rise. So it's not there anymore.
It's not there anymore, and surround that area where the homeless island really was,
Yeah.
a whole series of new buildings,
Oh, yeah.
including where the Office of City Planning happens to be now.
Yes.
And I went down there to make a speech about something involving, I don't know what it was, or I don't remember what it was. But I was amazed because I didn't realize how right I was when I said to them, the people who were talking about developing that spot, because if you recall, directly across from the homeless island was Goodwill.
Yes.
You remember when Goodwill was there and it had been donated to the Goodwill World, probably by the people who occupied it before for professional purposes. I think it was probably a beverage company gave it to them.
Well, that's going back before me.
Yeah, well, it was a long time. But what they have built there now, what the city government has there, is something equal, if not superior, to almost any new building in the city for professional purposes.
I'll be darned.
And I went in there and I thought I was, at this place when I went to speak, because they had the same kind of equipment, they had the same kind of practically everything. And all I could think about is you.
Thanks. Well, I still do go there. I just was there. There were some videos made of, preparatory to the book, and I took the filmmakers over there because I wanted them to see that spot too. And there's still some people at Panhandle there, but nothing like before. And the folks that used to live there, I have followed them for, what is it now, 21 years. Virtually all of them are dead. Some of them got rescued off the street, like Rita, one of the main characters in my book. Michelle, an African-American trans woman who got housed through the city services, but she died of natural causes. A woman named Little Bit, who you'll see in the book, died of natural causes. She got housed also thanks to the city. Things worked for some of them. Others died, fairly horribly. One of them had a colostomy bag and it broke and he died in his own excrement in the sun one hot summer day. Another one was eaten alive by the flesh-eating disease, which killed Rita's boyfriend. I mean, this stuff is in the book. It's not all pretty.
Let's go to the book. How did you end up ultimately getting the assignment to be the reporter on homelessness?
Oh, we had this wonderful managing editor named Robert Rosenthal, Rosie we all called him, who got hired right around 2003. And he came to the city and he was amazed at the visible homelessness we had in San Francisco. So he's walking down the street one day with his wife and kids and saw some guy take a bird and stuff it up under his jacket, crack it and snap its neck and stuff it under his jacket like he was going to eat it later. And Rosie said, okay, this is crazy. Let's send a reporter and a photographer out in the streets to figure this out. Why are there so many homeless people? So I was known as a street guy. I'd done a lot of homeless stories before and specialized in a lot of crime, essentially the unhappy stories that populate a lot of our newspapers. And so he said, yeah, send Fagan out. And Brant Ward is a photographer who I'd worked with. He was also pretty street. And we spent 6 months in the street doing this. Rosie said, take as much time as you want. We didn't want to piddle around for a year. Like, some people like to stretch these things out. No, we wanted to get in, get it done, and put it out. And so at the end of 6 months, we put out a 5-day series called The Shame of the City, which the first story was about Homeless Island. And in it, Tommy, Rita's boyfriend, rots to death, essentially, in the first paragraph of the story. And it displays how desperate people can be in the street. The second day was, I believe, us in a shelter. We went and stayed at MSC South, the biggest shelter at the time, on the West Coast. And then the third day was a family that we knew living in a van. We profiled them. The fourth day was an examination how we got here. And the fifth day was how to fix it, which of course worked, and it fixed the problem immediately. And then after it got, George Bush was president at the time, and he had his homeless czar read it, and he read it and the series, and it went all over the country, and I got letters from all over the world, actually. And so Rosie said, all right, you're not going back to your usual, stabbings and whatever. You're doing this. So I did the homeless beat nationally for 4 years.
Okay, roll backwards, because Bush left the presidency when Obama took over from him.
Yeah.
That means that you were into the homeless issue for report purposes prior to Obama becoming.
And Obama
president.
actually, one thing that impressed me about Bush, and Republicans get, fairly rightfully, a lot of bad raps on the social safety net issues, but Bush's czar, Philip Mangiano, realized that you actually save money if you house homeless people. It'll cost you about $85,000 a year, probably around more like 90 now, to leave someone in the street. And that's in police services, emergency room visits, cleanup, all kinds of things. But if you house someone in supportive housing, it's about $40,000 a year. So Bush thought, oh, good, we save money and you can be compassionate. The left wing said, let's be compassionate. It was a good convergence. And then Obama put more money toward the issue. And I covered that. I went away for a year. My national beat ended when I went away for a year to Stanford for a fellowship, where I scratched my chin and thought deep thoughts for a year, and then came back. And I've been doing homeless stories ever since, but I mix it up with other stuff, which I don't know now that I'm retired. But it's always been a core interest of mine. And I thought Obama made a lot of headway. And then when Trump came along, and I spent time with his homeless czar and Ben Carson and those types of folks, and essentially homelessness stayed flat. And then when Biden came along, there was some more progress made, and now we'll see what happens. But I've been doing, covering the stuff for a long time.
The article that you talked about, or the series that you talked about that generated so much attention, Newsom was mayor at that time.
Yes, he was.
Not me.
I know. You had gratefully washed your hands of that issue. You managed to dodge some bullets on that too, because that whole issue took Agnos down, even though he did some great innovations on this, and you created a lot of supportive housing. But then when Gavin Newsom came in, he he actually, kickstarted a lot of progress. And I loved talking with him about that. In fact, I just taped a long interview with him that'll be online at some point soon.
Yeah. in checking the book, you made no reference at all to the person who defeated Agnos.
I did not.
Yeah, you didn't mention him at all.
No.
In the book, because in fact, Agnos was charged by the public, literally, when he allowed the homeless people to live for a period of time in the Civic Center.
Yeah, Camp Agnos, they called it.
That is exactly what they call it.
And then Frank Jordan tried Matrix.
Correct.
How did you feel taking on this mess when you first started it? Because it's a mess.
I thought I was interviewing you. Tonight.
I'm taking notes.
Well, in fact, Jordan left himself totally and completely exposed. He was the incumbent, and I was looking for a job. And the opportunity presented itself by demonstrating how he had not done anything about the issue except talked about it and criticized Agnos. And I actually thought I could do something with it and about it. I just wish I'd had your book at that time, because my attitude and my performance certainly would have been quite dramatically different. But it was amazing because the whole business of addressing the issue was so complicated that when I first started out, I decided, we don't really know what we're doing running the city. At least I didn't know what I was doing running the city. And so if you remember, I had all those summits.
Yes, you did. Well, you were trying to gather information, which was the best approach, I thought.
No question, except if you recall, I canceled the homeless summit on the basis that it was impossible. Your book hadn't been written yet, and so it was impossible, literally, to have any meaningful dialogue, except the way in which the homeless issue seems to be treated all over the country. Yeah. Your book discusses how it's treated all over the country currently.
Yeah, it's there's the way I see it, and I allow myself an opinion now that I'm not working for the paper, and that I've written this book. We need more living wage. We need better health care. National health system would be nice. We need more affordable housing and better education. But the main thing is living wage, better housing, and health care. And if we could bring those up to scale, we can make a real difference in the problem. The trouble is that nationally we do not do that well, and it percolates down. So San Francisco, San Jose, Chicago, New York, everyone is trying to solve their street problems on a micro level when it's actually created on a macro level. So you're bailing out the tide with one of those little kid shovels that you use on the beach. It's until there's a national emphasis on addressing this, it's really hard for anyone to make progress. I think Newsom, when he was mayor, he stepped up the supportive housing emphasis that you had done when you were mayor. He stepped it up into a whole new level. He started street counseling. I mean, I used to walk around with him to homeless camps, and he studied it. He from the ground up. He understood the science of this. And as governor, he's put more than $20 billion into the issue. It's still, the homelessness went up in this last year.
Tell me, you were able to penetrate, obviously with integrity, from the homeless population that you dealt with. Why don't you tell us about exactly how you managed to establish that kind of confidence in them with you?
I like talking to homeless people, and when I left home when I was 16, slept in a field a little while, then an unfinished garage. I cleaned houses. I mean, I lived to the bone, and then when I went to San Jose State, I got myself situated. I would sleep in my car in between semesters because there was nowhere to go home to. So I had a feeling of what it was like to, and we were poor for most of my childhood, a lot of it. So I knew what it was like not to have things to not have a place to go home to. I knew what that was like. And then after college, I was a street singer around the world where I'd sleep in alleys and doorways, and it became, it doesn't scare me. I don't necessarily want to do that today. I like hotels if I can find them. But so when it came time to talk to homeless people for my stories, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't, put off. I didn't go, oh, you haven't washed in a week. What I tried to see, what I've always tried to see is the human inside, the child inside, the person who had hope inside, because it's always there. You can always reach that person if you think it and try hard and try to have a conversation. You can't. It doesn't always succeed, but I remember that everyone was someone's baby. Everyone had hope at some point. And so when I have a conversation in the street, I think the folks I talk to understand that I actually give a damn, because homeless people have really good bullshit detectors. They can tell if you're trying to put them on, or you just want to grab a quote and you don't really care. I do care, and I want to do stories that illuminate what the desperation is, so that people can make better decisions on how to address this. And I often tell people that. And I got to the point where I wasn't afraid. It was many years ago. I finally got to the point where I wasn't afraid to be more personal. Say, after initial conversation, say, do you really want to be out here? And you get most homeless people, every homeless person I know, at 3 a.m, when the conversation boils down to absolute honesty, no one wants to be homeless. No one wants to sleep in the dirt. And I sympathize with that. And I say, well, let me do a story that can make more awareness of this and maybe make a difference. And that's what I wanted to do with the book, is help humanize Rita and Tyson, these two people that I met and followed for years, so that you can see how someone becomes homeless and how you can help them off the street. Because they were helped off the street by their families. That was what finally worked for them. Other people in the book helped with city programs. It's a solvable problem. It's a criminal shame that we have this problem to the extent that we do, because it doesn't exist like this in other countries. I lived in Australia, New Zealand, Europe. They don't have this scale of problem because they have healthcare, housing, wages that actually pay the rent. Those three things are not sure things here in America.
And I take it that you explain in the book how America, by comparison, is not like many of the other countries. Yeah. Does it have anything to do with the fact that America is so multiracial?
Multiracial?
Yeah.
Well, we have racism in the country for sure. I mean, in this city, and not for, I don't believe San Francisco is a racist city, but 5% of the population is African American, more than 30% is homeless. It's the opportunities that have been given to African Americans to this day, less ability to find work, less ability to make a comparable wage. Just historically, we just haven't pulled it together. Latino people, the same kind of problem. Asian people, you don't see on the street as much. That's an interesting cultural thing that there's probably a PhD thesis somewhere. But race has absolutely a factor in homelessness.
In your book, there's almost no reference to any interacting by you with Asians. Why not?
I don't think I've met more than a handful of Asian people who were homeless in anywhere. I mean, because I went all over the country. Asian people generally are better at doing multi-generational help to each other. You know, you go live in cousin's house, mom's house, whatever. It's actually kind of amazing to see that. Chinatown, Brant and I did some stories in Chinatown of people, multi-generational people, who were living by their fingernails in crowded apartments, and they weren't throwing people out in the street. I don't know. What do you think? You've been mayor here.
Well, let me stay with this for a minute.
Yeah.
Because in the book, I didn't get the impression that you spent a lot of time with Asians. Was that also the example of how much more time that we spend with the 35% you talked about, or we spend with the Latinos, from a government standpoint, from an elected official standpoint?
Well, you go to as a reporter, and I think as a government, you go to the most acute problem. And for me, and Brant, good friend of mine, lifelong friend, photographer, we were together for many years after that initial series. We decided we were going to concentrate on the chronically homeless, which is about 30% of the homeless population that you see in the street. They've been out for a year or more, and
is that the standard? A year or more on the street?
A year or more in the street, or there's a couple of formulas. Over 3 years, you spend a year collectively, but essentially you're stuck, and you have a disability of some kind, which is either physical disability, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, mental illness, and you're not going to pull yourself up off the street by your bootstraps generally if you are chronically homeless. So that's the population I have spent most of my career, most of my time of covering homelessness, concentrating on. And the other people are in shelters, the other homeless population in shelters or couch surfing or in some kind of temporary housing on their way in and out of homelessness, which is actually kind of good. The system can work for that population. With the chronic population, it's very difficult to convince people to come in. So when you're spending your time on the street with chronically homeless people, you find a lot of white people, a lot of black people, some Latino people, not a whole lot of Asian people, and a lot of LGBTQ kids. It's an astounding number of LGBTQ kids that wind up in the street. So that's who I would be writing about.
You referenced early on at the outset of this conversation that the island that I spoke about, that I went to see, you said that the people who lived on that island, did they really become as much of a cluster of just them, or were there interactions with people from other locations in the homeless world, or was it really boiled down to just that crowd?
Well, it was that crowd at its core. People would come in and out. There were about a dozen people there who, back then in 2003, we didn't have tents out there. Occupy in 2011 brought us tents in huge numbers, and they never went away. That's why you see more tents today. Back then it was shopping carts, cardboard, tarps, that kind of thing. It was makeshift. And you had those dozen folks there who would there's a life cycle when you're that far dissolute in your life. But people would come in from the Tenderloin, and I mentioned some of these folks in there in the book from the mission. They'd come through to visit, to grab some food, maybe make some drug deals. And these were all little drug deals. When you're living hand to mouth, your day for the typical islander consisted of waking up on your piece of cardboard with your blankets under a tarp if it's cold, going to find your dope for the day so you don't get dope sick, because if you're on heroin, you got to shoot up a couple of times a day. Going to find some food, going to find a way to get some money somewhere, whether that's taking a little bit of your drugs and chipping it and then selling it and then using the rest to buy some more, or boosting something somewhere, or dumpster diving, or finding stuff in the street that you can sell, clothes, appliances, whatever, and then wandering around trying to make sure you don't get your teeth kicked in while you're looking for this stuff that you need. And that the comfort of the island was that you knew you could come back, and that night you'd have about a dozen people sleeping together, so you won't get attacked. If you're a lone homeless person wandering around, a lot of people will just wander the streets all night and then sleep during the day, because you can get attacked if you're by yourself, especially women. My heart, Brant and my both, my heart went out most to the women who were in the street, aging, getting attacked, raped, robbed, all the very vulnerable population. But the island gave you some safety. And some of the folks that would come in, there was one particular named Jill May, who I got to know in the Tenderloin, and she would wander through the island to get some drugs, to hang out a bit, maybe share some food. And she was super skinny. I must have weighed 80, 90 pounds or something. And her boyfriend stiffed a dealer on crack for $150 worth of crack. And so the dealer came back, and to get back at him, doused her in gas and burned her alive. And that was an extreme version of what can happen at its worst. But when you're living outside, it is you're vulnerable. It's dangerous. It's cold. You're hungry. It's just, we should not have people living outside like that, and they don't want to live like that.
Did you find, as you did your observations for securing the first 6 months of the information that you wrote the story about, shame, did you find that there was a considerable amount of help being supplied by homeless people to homeless people?
Yeah. There's a supportive environment there. It can get testy, if you're super hungry or you're dope sick, and the person next to you or at the other end of the block has what you want. Yeah, you can get into a fight. You can go steal their stuff. You can have episodes if you're having a mental episode and lash out. But there is a supportive environment there. People share their food. They share their dope. There's a scene in there of, there are several scenes of people shooting up because these people that I wrote about were drug addicts. But when you're sharing just that little bit to get you.
Okay, but in your book you cover some of the social services that are provided.
Yeah.
By the government. Are tents one of those social services?
Well, as far as I know, the city, last I checked, wasn't handing out tents. But
then where did the tents come from?
There's some social service nonprofit or community groups can give out tents. But when Occupy came along, hundreds of tents went into the community, and they never left. And then kind-hearted people will go buy tents and hand them out. Some community groups will supply tents, and homeless people will panhandle a little bit. And yeah, you can go to Big Five and get yourself a tent for $20. It's interesting to me that this hadn't occurred to people to do before Occupy made it a fashion. It's like, wow, a tent is so much easier than shoving a couple of shopping carts together and sticking tarp over it, because the tarp blows away. It has holes in it. A tent actually works. But boy, it makes it more visible by far. There are the one night count that existed of homeless people in San Francisco in 2003 was about 8,400 people. Today, it's less than that, more like 8,300. And until recently, it was down below 8,000. But what you see is tents. And what you see is people living in supportive housing who aren't getting enough counseling to change their lives. And they come back outside during the day, sit on milk carts, wander around, do their things, sometimes set up a tent, and then go back inside to sleep a lot of times. But they look homeless. So
You referenced some of the people who were eligible for some form of actual money coming from the social service capacity of some of the local organizations. And that money was apparently supplied by the government.
yeah. Oh, there was GA, it was welfare. At the time, you could get about $400. Well, 20 odd years ago when Gavin Newsom was mayor, you could get about $450 a month. That's not enough to rent anything, not enough to do much of anything except give yourself a little relief throughout the month. He did Care Not Cash, which became a huge, it was a ballot measure and something that he conceived. And it took that welfare money and used it to supply supportive housing. And then what you would do is, if you were mostly chronically homeless, that was the target audience, you'd take the supportive housing unit and you wouldn't get the welfare money, you would get a $60 stipend, but also food stamps and support services and whatnot. And it housed an astonishing amount of people. And the versions of that today still house a lot of folks. You're not living high on the hog at $60 a month, but at least you're inside.
And were in your conversations with homeless people themselves, did they have some view of that process?
Yeah, it's cumbersome. And homeless people, generally, when you're chronic, not very good at making it to appointments. So a lot of times you'd go into the housing office or the welfare office and say, you get signed up and they say, well, come back in 3 days and we'll take you to the next step. Nah, they don't show up. That's where the term meet them where they are came along. So a lot of folks try to, the emphasis now is to, as quickly as possible, sign people up for services, get them inside, get them situated, and don't let it fester too long, because you're going to lose folks. So a lot of the homeless folks that I have talked to say, I'm on a waiting list forever on homelessness, for housing. They kind of lose hope, or they keep, the thing that strikes me is they keep applying. They'll fall off the track and then they'll apply again. They really want to be housed, but they don't want to be told what to do. That's why shelters can be unpopular for a lot of chronic folks. They don't want a curfew, don't want someone telling them they can't do whatever the hell they want inside the shelter. They don't want strictures. But if you give them a place to live, at least they got a roof, and then you can work on them with counseling.
Did you spend any amount of your time on other than the homeless people, i.e., did you spend some of your time on some of the social service people and nonprofit organizations?
Yes, yeah, and I was impressed. Some years ago, a couple of editors, when I was on the homeless beat, had me spend about a year looking at all the funding toward homelessness in the city. and they had some idea that it was going to be a nest of poverty pimps and people who were perpetuating the problem so they could stay employed. That's one theory that goes out a lot. I found that virtually everyone I encountered was overworked and underpaid and burned out in a few years because it's really hard work. You're dealing with a difficult population. Most people do that out of real goodness of their heart. You have to have the goodness of your heart to want to do that kind of work. Otherwise, you do something where you're not dealing with difficult issues. But many of the nonprofits I've been very impressed with in the city. Now, there are screw-ups too, and I've written about the screw-ups. Some of the supportive housing units and some of the street counseling can wind up running in place or declining in their quality. I wrote a story, one of the last stories I wrote over the last year or so was about a man who went into a broken bathroom and died right there on the toilet, and he rotted so bad he started leaking through the door before anyone figured out he was dead. That shouldn't happen. And it was a very good nonprofit that happened, and someone had taken their eye off the ball in that particular complex.
Well, your observations, as recorded in the book and as reported in the book, clearly indicates that there was a way in which to connect with the homeless people on the streets, as well as their relatives all over the country.
Yeah.
How did you penetrate that?
Well, with Rita, with all the islanders, when I do an in-depth thing, I want to find out everything. I want to find out where they were born, what they were like as kids, where things went wrong. Because every chronically homeless person has a point where there was a fork in the road, and then another fork, and then another fork, and then you're in ruin. So with Rita, she was kind of difficult to get to know intensely at first. A lot of them were standoffish. They'd tell you to screw off, leave us alone, and you just, showing up in life is a lot of what life is about. So it kept showing up, and eventually got to know that she had 5 kids and that things had gone off the rails. And then her family contacted me to say they were coming out to find her after they'd read my story, which was wonderful. And I waited a year to see if it would stick. Then I went back to Florida, where her sister lived and where Rita was living with her sister Pam, and things had worked. It was wonderful rebirth, and we became friends over the years. With Tyson, his brother Barron was living in Ohio, and I had done a story where Tyson was sitting on a piece of cardboard. I interviewed him as one of a series of people I talked to for a story about the Embarcadero Navigation Center, great shelter on the Embarcadero still. And his brother saw the story and a picture of Tyson and said, "I'm flying out there. Help me find him. I want to help him out." And so that's how I connected with those two. With many of the other homeless people, I would just continue to show up, ask who their family is, call the family to see, all right, where did this go wrong? Do you have any desire to connect with these folks? Sometimes people say, "Nah, he used us up years ago," or "She used us up. We want nothing to do with them." And sometimes they say, "Yeah, I would really like to connect." So I give phone numbers to phone numbers and help connect, because you're not supposed to get involved in your stories as a reporter. That's just being a human. So I like doing that, and it's a real joy when it works.
And those kind of connections, did you find them replicated by the governmental units that allegedly and should have been doing the same kind of work on behalf of homeless people?
Yeah, after the Rita story ran of her rescue, and then a dentist read the story about, and she had lost all her teeth, because when you do a lot of drugs, you lose your teeth, and gave her teeth. So Gavin Newsom read this, and he said, it helped inspire him to create this program called Homeward Bound, which is a wonderful program that has street counselors and now people counseling in throughout the system will connect you, ask you if you want to connect with friends or family back where you came from, and if they say yes and the other side says yes, you connect them and then you give them a bus ticket or a plane ticket home and give it a shot. And about half of those reunifications really take fruit. And
did you see where just last week San Jose is adopting the program?
yes, and I was very happy to see that. It's been replicated a few places, and I think it's wonderful. It's sure maybe half of the people who participate wind up drifting back into homelessness or it doesn't stick. Half is a good percentage as far as I'm concerned. Anything that can help is wonderful, and some of these reunifications are inspiring and joyful, and they were with Rita, they were with Tyson. Of course, I can't tell you the ending of the book because I'm not supposed to tell you the ending of the book, but there was a
Well,
very
I'm sure
good.
glad you just stopped me. Because that's my next line of questions. I won't go there.
Thank
I
you.
will not dare touch it at all. But let me ask, have you been personally invited by any we elected officials to come in and brief the units of our government that we have the responsibility over, that has a subject matter within their framework? Have you had any government other than your interacting with Newsom?
Yeah. Ed Lee had me in to talk to him about what I thought could work about supportive housing. Interim Mayor Farrell had me in to talk about counseling. And as a reporter, I wasn't pushing anything. I would just say, this is what I've seen. This is what, for solutions journalism, as they call it, this is what some of the good models are. And this is what I've written about, because I'm not there to push anyone into a direction. I'm there to supply information which hopefully shows a way by itself, by the information. But there have been, actually quite a few people have called me or had me in, which I appreciate. I've talked with you, but you're not in office. But you're very receptive and you're very smart when you answer. It's
Not only that, I don't want you to talk with any of them because I might want to take that job.
So you're going to announce running again?
That's right.
Right here and now, yeah.
Mayor Brown, you've been asking some wonderful questions. Thank you for that. I have some questions here from the audience, which are very interesting and will augment our conversation to this point. You're asking about politicians in the mayor's office. What would you advise the new mayor of San Francisco to focus on to make an impact on homelessness?
You're talking to me?
Both of you.
Both, yeah, because I
Really?
know you've got some. I'll go first because you will matter more. I think Dan Lurie has. I have interviewed and written about him many times over the years, and he's done his organization Tipping Point, and he have done some terrific examples of building supportive housing quickly and more cheaply, and it seems to me that he understands the problem because he's a wonky kind of guy. He's looked at the science of how to address homelessness, and I think he sincerely wants to take a cut at it. It's kind of a losing proposition, like we were talking about, saying I'm going to solve it all. No, say you're going to make headway. Say you're going to try these programs, and don't set the expectations too high. I think he's going to make a good try.
At the time that I served as mayor, obviously homelessness was one of the issues that had prompted my electability and my being elected. And there were enough examples of predecessors who were disasters on that subject matter as well as multiple of the subject matters. What I would recommend to the new mayor of San Francisco is that he really ought to have you come in now that you're retired. Not too many things to do. He really should utilize the wealth of knowledge contained in the 260, 70 pages of your book, because you've made it really very simple and very direct. And I'm going to recommend to him, and I'm going to also suggest to him that I'm going to come to that session with the staff people that he brings in there. And then I'm going to recommend to him that there be a monthly follow-up evaluating what they have learned and what has been recommended to them and what has been tested. And I would also tell him that you really do need to recycle your staff people who are dealing with this most complicated, challenging, probably not solvable, but appropriately treatable if done in the right direction.
Appropriately treatable. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, I'm a reporter. I'll talk to anyone, and I'm happy to share whatever can be shared. Yeah, sure. I'm not looking for a job, but like I said, I'm happy to talk.
And by the way, I did not find any real comparable base of material when I was addressing the issue. Newsom's Care, Not Cash is a brilliant issue, really a real brilliant issue. But somehow it didn't develop a hook as an idea that carried on from the moment he was no longer the person advocating Care, Not Cash. And then there was a collection of social workers who had their ideas and their views on the concept of Care, Not Cash. The idea that suddenly we no longer were going to give people the $400 stipend or whatever the numbers had become. And Republicans and Democrats alike were arguing about it. I think only at the national level, only probably Clinton understood the idea of dealing with the homelessness from the perspective of being a homeless person, period. And you really do have to, when I served as mayor, I always thought I really had to understand the homeless, and I couldn't do it from a distance, period. And I couldn't spend the time that he spent doing what he did to get the information that becomes the cornerstone of his book. And I understand that I really couldn't do that. All I could do was to make sure that my folk dealt and treated whatever came before them instantly and without punishment. You really do have to avoid being perceived as punishing people for being poor, for people to be mentally challenged with problems associated with it, for people being addicted to whatever happens to be the thing they're addicted to. You really have to be very careful because it cannot be treated as punishment.
Yeah, and Care Not Cash had and then he did a 10-year plan, like so many places, to address homelessness, chronic homelessness. But Care Not Cash was very controversial. A lot of people said it was cruel, and then a lot of people said, "Well, this is the best way to spend the money." And I had to listen to all sides, and I will still always listen to all sides. And I can understand where the people who criticized it were coming from. They're desperate to help people in any way they can, and starting some new thing is scary. I had a nice long talk with Clinton about all this, too. And you're right. I think he really understood the issue.
And you know what? I think it was because he doesn't I think he has not really ever admitted, but he came from poverty.
Yeah.
Literally came from poverty. Multiple fathers and relationships with his mothers, and his history was frankly that of black folk in the South. He really did have that history as part of, but he had managed through all the process of the good things that were being done to help people out, and he had taken full advantage of it. But he understood it enough so he wouldn't let the Republicans get away with exploiting that as a negative issue. He would really attempt to step up and address it in such a way that they accused him of stealing their issue.
Yeah.
When-
Yeah, it's interesting that I didn't mention at all in public that I had my own experience with homelessness and poverty for many years, not until the last few years actually, because you get judged, and it makes it seem like you're only reporting about it because you only have that self-interest, and there was some self-interest in that, trying to figure it out, but I approached it as a journalist. But it's something Clinton didn't, he talked about it on occasion, but he didn't make that his leading thing. You know what poverty's like, and it's something that you have with you as a frame of reference, but that's what it is. It's a frame of reference, and you try to do the best damn good you can with whatever tools you have.
I want to make sure to get to some other audience questions, and we had a lot of interest in the whole issue of drug abuse in the streets of San Francisco. What is your opinion, and by your opinion, both of you, what is your opinion on safe consumption sites at some homeless shelters? And secondly, on forced treatment, especially considering the danger of current drugs?
Boy.
Well,
Why
I'm
don't
going to
you do
answer
that
that
one first?
all right?
Yes. Yes.
You are correct. I am from a category of a person that would be declared to be poverty-stricken. I often tell people that my migration to California was driven by a woman, my mother, who was certain that I would not survive in Texas. I would not survive because, based on her mother driving and related forces with the higher sheriff, and that's what we called the guy there, he had a relationship with my grandmother. I didn't understand that at all.
You were a little kid.
What?
You were a kid, right?
Yeah, I didn't understand that at all. But my mother knew that I was not long for Mineola. I would be literally probably one of the persons that would be treated harshly by the mean folk in the city. And she got me out here to her brother, one of her brothers. She had 3 or 4 brothers, but one of her brothers who had come out to work in the shipyard. He initially wanted to go to the military, but they were not taking blacks in the military in the late, and she sent me out here to be with him with instructions to get in school and join church. But whatever you do, don't follow him. I said, what do you mean, don't follow him? She says he gambles only. He doesn't go to church. And I'm not sure where he gets money.
That's a warning sign.
Yes. So with all of that, I knew that I was a short-termer in his space here in San Francisco, because I was not going to disappoint my mother, and I didn't, and I lived on my own. I did everything I could to make sure that I didn't get arrested. And I made sure that I did join church, and I made sure that I watched my uncle closely to make sure that he didn't tell my mother that I was doing anything inconsistent with her directions. And I literally had to figure out how to do what you did. I went to San Francisco State,
Yeah.
and it was a college then, not a university, and it was in the Haight. And I got in that school because there was a guy that worked at 1170 Sacramento, in that tall, thin building that a lot of well-to-do people live in. My uncle had asked him about school, because my uncle didn't know anything about school, and so he told him, "Well, your nephew ought to go to Stanford. That's a school they tell me is good."
Right.
Well, I went down to Stanford. I got on the train and went down to Stanford,
What'd they
and
say?
took with me my cards showing what I had done grade-wise
Yeah.
in the school. The school that I was the second class to graduate from 12 grades. One of my sisters was the first. The other two sisters left town when they finished 10th grade to go to Beaumont and 2 or 3 other towns where we had friends and relatives so they could get the last 2 grades. My sister, who became a principal in school, was the first class to graduate. I was the second class to graduate. And so when I showed my materials to this guy at the mission room at Stanford, he looked at it, he looked at it, he looked at it. While he was looking at that, I was looking at information on how you get into Stanford. He said, "Mr. Brown, I got bad news for you. I can't admit you to Stanford because you don't have the classes that you finish in high school to get into Stanford. You don't have any foreign language and 2 or 3 others." He said so. And so I said, "So I can't admit you." He said, "But it may be your lucky day." I said, "Well, it's already my lucky day because I read what it costs to go to Stanford." And I knew I wasn't going to Stanford.
We're going to San Francisco State.
Yeah, based on the cost. He then said, "Well, let me tell you, I don't work here. I'm only doing this as a part job. I teach at San Francisco State.
Okay, that's how you.
And they are desperate for students. So I'm going to admit you."
So that's it. So
That's how I got into San Francisco State.
And that's
the
how-
first day that I got to San Francisco State, I learned before finishing all the forms that there was something called ROTC
Oh yes.
that paid $50 a month.
Yeah.
So I enrolled in ROTC. When they gave me my assignment, it was alphabetical. B.
Brown. Yeah. So you B.
You know who the other next B was?
Agno. Wait, no.
Burton.
Burton. Oh my God. That's how you know the guy. All right. You know what? We should probably answer this question that he had. But this is how you wound up. You didn't wind up homeless. You didn't wind
That's
up drug
right.
addicted.
That's why I'm
It was education that did that
and church.
in church.
I became the janitor at the church. Ham Boswell was the pastor at the church. And when I told him that I had to be in church, and he said, "Well, I think the janitor's quitting. I don't know what else you got going, but we have a little closet down there in a room."
A room and a
So
job.
I had $50 already.
See?
I had a second job.
And you came from that to this. Here, we should ask the answer. What is that
we've
question
got a
you
limited
had?
amount of time, so
Yeah.
this is what we're
I
going to
love that. Yes.
when you buy Kevin's book, you'll learn that he spent quite a bit of time through his life as a musician and as a busker. And Kevin has a song that he wants to play for us. We're going to set it up right
Oh,
here.
they might
But
do-
in the meantime, I have a question would be good for Mayor Brown, I think, given his perspective. And if you want to set up, Kevin, while I'm
Sure.
asking the question.
Yeah.
Well, but you should know that all of you probably will be hearing him as a musician for the first time with some regularity at a bar over in North Beach. He plays with the Irish
Newsboys.
Newsboys, and they heard me trying to sing. They had me come participate, and Irish.
Yes, and he sang Danny Boy.
Okay.
It was pretty terrific. Yes.
So,
Should come back March 7th and
Oh, right. And here's
sing Danny Boy.
here's Lee Housekeeper, who introduced the band members to form this thing 15 years ago.
so,
What for?
Chief Sullivan's.
so
Yep.
Mayor Brown, this is a question relating to the disproportionate number of African Americans who are homeless in San Francisco. So representing 5% of the population. Kevin, you'll confirm that this is correct. 30% of the homeless population is African American.
Yes.
And so the specific question from this audience member was to talk a little bit about the urban renewal projects of the what was it, the 70s, I guess, and late 60s,
Yeah.
and how they decimated the Fillmore district and the potential effects ultimately on homelessness among African Americans in San Francisco as a result of the incredible displacement of that population from the Fillmore district out to the Bayview and elsewhere.
Not only did it create the problem you described, but the black people who were living in San Francisco at the time really had a community. There were three neighborhoods: the Fillmore, where I lived, the Hunters Point, Bayview, where many black people still live, and those who got bought out if they owned anything in the Fillmore or any other place, bought out in Ingleside. And that became the three black communities. And at that time, the population of black folk was somewhere between 15 and 20% of the total population, and they all lived here. When redevelopment came along, pushed by this government, really pushed us out of San Francisco. So we now live in Pittsburgh. We now we now live in Richmond. We now live in Vallejo. We now live in Fairfield. All because, in part, San Francisco pushing black people out by tearing down and raiding the only neighborhoods in which they could live. The black folk had probably one of the best neighborhoods in the city, and it was all of that fabulous housing that's now considered fabulous housing. And all of the Victorians were part of what we had in the Fillmore. And my uncle lived at 1028 Oak Street, Oak and Divisadero. That uncle lived there, and I had another uncle who lived in public housing. The uncle who lived in Divisadero gave me the word on how long he owed his sister helping me, and the other brother lived in public housing in the upper part of the city in the Fillmore. And black people were run out of San Francisco by that project process, period. Only one housing unit was built by a process that had some emphasis on black people. And that's when the ILWU, the International Longshoremen and Warehouses Union, built what's on Gary, I think Gary Webster and Laguna, that whole unit that's there. That's the only housing that was built as you took away from black folk. all the other housing that they occupied.
So that was an excellent question and a tragedy that resulted from it. Before we listen to Kevin, I'm just going to formally conclude our program, and then we can listen to Kevin and then adjourn out for book signing. Lots of books out there to be signed, and also mix and mingle because there were a lot of other good questions that were asked, and Mayor Brown can be around for a few more minutes.
Okay, but can I say one thing, though? You've got to have that book. I'm telling you, and I don't get a percentage.
No.
It is really an incredible book. I'd love to read. Because of my eyesight, I'm handicapped on the reading side. So if you know anything about where you find me, you'll notice that I have the most magnifying equipment you can get anywhere, period. And I had anticipated about a month ago or so checking his book out, and I check books out, and I'm gonna wait for the one that's recorded. You won't wait for the record. I'm telling you, you start the book and you won't put it down. And I stopped reading everything else
Oh, I appreciate
until I finished that book.
With that uncompensated advertisement, thank you.
Thank you very much.
This meeting of the Commonwealth
appreciate
Club
that.
World Affairs
Yeah.
is formally concluded.
Thank you.
Kevin.
I swear, Mr. Willie Brown, I could listen to him all day. I mean, he's a time machine and an encyclopedia. And again, I really appreciate you encouraging me over the years to write this book because it was part of the process. It helped keep me going. And with that having been said, something like 40 years ago or so, I learned this song when I was street busking in New Zealand. In the sleeping in the alleys phase of my period of my life. And this was written not by me. I've written quite a few songs about homelessness, actually. But this was written by Don McLean. And I used to sing it in New Zealand. And it was as true then about homelessness as it is today. I was walking by the graveyard late last Friday night. I heard somebody yelling, it sounded like a fight. It was just a drunken hobo dancing circles in the night, pouring whiskey on the headstones in the blue moonlight. So often have I wondered where these homeless brothers go, down in some hidden valley where their sorrows cannot show, where the police cannot find them, where the wanted man can go. There's freedom when you're walking, even though you're walking slow. Smash your bottle on a gravestone and live while you can. That homeless brother is my friend. It's hard to be a pack rat, it's hard to be a beau. Yeah, living so much harder where the heartless people go. Somewhere the dogs are barking and the children seem to know. Even Jesus on the highway was a lost hobo. And they hear a holy silence from the temples in the hills, and they see his ragged tatters as another kind of frill. And they envy him the sunshine, but they pity him the chill. And they're sad to do their living for some other kind of thrill. Sash your bottle on a gravestone and live while you can. That homeless brother is my friend. Somewhere there was a woman, somewhere there was a child, somewhere there was a cottage where the marigolds grew wild. But somewhere's just like nowhere when you leave it for a while. You'll find the broken-hearted when you're traveling jungle style. Down the bowels of a broken land where numbers live like men, where those who keep their senses have them taken back again, where the nightstick cracks with crazy rage, where madmen don't pretend, where wealth has no beginning and poverty no end. Smash your bottle on a gravestone and live while you can. That homeless brother is my friend. That homeless brother is my friend. Thank you. And I'm not putting the case out for dollars. That one's free.
Everyone, please join us in the library here for the book signing. In 11 minutes, cocktails will be available for purchase on the second floor as well. Thank you all for coming.